One of the number one things you need as a business or creator is visibility. If your audience can't see or hear what you do, it almost doesn't exist. That's why DiffWorks is your one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs. I'm talking video, audio, photography, graphic design, headshots, websites. They do it all. So if you're looking for multimedia that'll give you a competitive edge, check out DiffWorks and book a consultation at staydiff.com. Hey, this is Kahja Elliott, Bronx born and raised, ATL made, Bay Area becoming, and this is the As Told By podcast. All right, here we are. Welcome back to another episode of the As Told By podcast. I am not traveling this week. I am in Oakland. And this is going to be a fun episode because this is someone whose work I've kind of been following over the last year and a half, and now I get to sit down and talk to them. So photographing assignments for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the James Beard Foundation, Resi, Bon Appetit, and every major food festival I've been to. Welcome, Clay Williams, to the As Told By podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're visiting Oakland, so I'm like, oh, we got to talk to Clay while he's here.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, Clay, you are like photographer extraordinaire. I think I ran into you the very first time at Bay Haven.
Yeah, I've shot all the Bay Haven festivals.
Yes, Bay Haven. And then I was in Charleston at Charleston Wine and Food. I'm like, oh, there's a photographer again.
Yeah.
And then I was were you at Black Women in Food too?
No, I haven't been to Black and Food yet.
Okay. So then I think the next time I would have seen you was at James Beard. And I'm like, okay, he does all the events.
Yeah, I get around.
Yeah, you get around. I refer to you, I think I said this to you when I ran into you at James Beard, that I refer to you in my mind as like the Herb Ritz of the Black food community.
Okay, all right, I'll take that.
For the folks who may not know the reference, Herb Ritz, renowned photographer in late 90s, 2000s that, captured a lot of pop culture history. And one of the things I think was so distinctive about him is that he would capture people who, looking back now, were just on the precipice of their stardom.
Right.
Yeah. So I like in your portraiture of people, particularly Black people in the food industry, is like, these are people who are either at the height or on their way to.
Right.
Okay. Come on and create a living record.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a part of why I do what I do, is to be able to tell that story over time. I've been doing this I never quite know how to count it. I've been doing it full-time professionally for 13 years, this month, actually. But I was doing it as a sort of side gig for a couple of years before that. And so, it's a different scale to be able to look back at, where cities are, where institutions come from, like, how people go from, there are a number of people I met, like when they were volunteering at the James Beard House, 5-10 years ago, who are, who have their own restaurants, who are like doing big things, and like, being able to make to tell that story over time, rather than just being like a one night thing, or like a, one event, one dinner. I feel like that's a big part of the view I'm looking for, these days. Kwame Nwachi was certainly doing his thing with Kith and Kin when I first met him. He had already been on TV. He'd already done a lot of things already, at that point. And that was, I want to say 2018, 2019. But, I was there at the awards in Chicago when, he won Emerging Chef, or Rising Star, it was called back then. Mm-hmm. Same night as Mashama won her award for, I want to say, Outstanding Chef. And being able to, have those moments, but also, I photographed his cookbook, and I have photographed all 4 years so far of the family reunion, and, and seeing the people there, seeing the people at Bayhaven, seeing the people at who come out for the awards. Like, it's it's really about those connections of the time in between and getting from one place to another in your career and in your lives and all that. So it's, yeah, I feel like it's a privilege to be able to witness those moments and those transitions and those, that growth.
Yeah, chronicling people's career arc eventually will be. When I think, and I have a very limited knowledge of this, but when I think of Black portraiture, I think of course, Gordon Parks,
Yes.
right? I think from a historical perspective, but then I also think of people like Flo Ngala, who does work, current, right? Pop culture work. And then I think about like people who are based here in the Bay. There's a man here, Kevin Allen is his name, does amazing black and white portraiture. And I think even though they're all distinctly different, what they have in common is the capturing of the beauty of the normalcy of people,
Right.
even people who have really high public profiles. Sure. So was there a photographer whose style influenced your approach when you first got started?
It's interesting. I think I have started to look at other photographers for inspiration later, like in more recent years, like as I've developed and as I've thought, when I was starting out, I was just trying to survive on it, right? Like I was just trying to figure out how to make enough money to live, like, every like $250, $500 gig at a time. So yes, I wanted to get better, and yes, I wanted to, like, I had sort of goals for what I wanted to be doing, but like, I wasn't at a point to have a scope for where I wanted to be going, where I wanted my work, what I wanted my work to be. The idea that like anyone would know who I am based on my work, having not met me or having not been in front of my camera before, was something that like it hadn't occurred to me for a long time until it started happening when people were like, oh, I know who you are. And so it's only later that I started thinking, okay, well, what is that body of work as a whole? And so thinking about that, like I do look at Gordon Parks for sure. Dawood Bey, who's based in Chicago, but is from New York. Who also, you talk about normalcy, like he would walk around Harlem. He's from Queens. He actually is from not far where I have family. In Queens, or I had family living in that same area, probably at the same time. And he'd take the train out into Manhattan and go up to Harlem, and he'd just photograph people. Like there are pictures from the street, like portraits from the street of people in Bed-Stuy and Clinton Hill, where I was growing up, from like exactly that period. And it's just like, the people who catch his eye, those moments. And his thing is very much about the portrait is an act of engagement. It's something that's done together with the subject. And when I was starting out, I was still, I'm a little shy when it comes to like talking to strangers, and like, when I'm at work, it's work, and it's like I need people to do what I need to do. Mm-hmm. But usually I'm more of a like, I want people to do the things they're doing. I want to be sort of invisible. And so, I was doing more street photography, more candids, more stuff like just out in the world. And it's only as I've developed relationships and as I've done more work in the community, in the food community at large over time, where I'm more confident to be able to say like, okay, I just need you to turn this way. I need you to do that. And there are different types of things. Like I'm not doing that in the middle of the kitchen, in the middle of service, right? But like, if we're talking about portraiture, like a lot of it is, I have a vision in my head, but like, I also want it to be about who the person is, and not just me posing somebody, in a way that isn't who they are. And so, I look at the way he did his work, or he has done his work through the years, and I definitely, look at folks like Gordon Parks for sure, Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, were both, sort of mid to end of the 20th century. They did amazing work documenting. I mean, fashion was a big part of how they both made their money, but their portraiture just generally was amazing, and they were doing it in the pop culture. Avedon was, he worked for Rolling Stones and Rolling Stone magazine. Sorry, and he was photographing politicians. He was photographing. He has this big project called The Family where he photographed, I think, almost 100 or like maybe 60 to 100 of the people the leaders around the country. And that was, there were future presidents in there. There were, there was the head of the CIA. There were the Congress people. There was senators. There were community leaders. Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, like all these people. And he was doing it in this particular way, where he's giving a sort of scope of what the leadership of the nation was in, the mid 70s. He photographed the Chicago 7. He photographed, Warhol and his whole crew of artists and actors and whatever. And so when I think about the body of work that I'm doing, I want to, that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking about growth. I'm thinking about development. I'm thinking about engagement. But I'm also thinking about like scope. Yeah.
Long term.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I've been asking people this all season just because it hits home for me personally. This is not my full-time job that I do. I still have my good old day job in HR. But, I'm so interested in kind of what people's personal career conversion points have been.
Sure.
And I read that you initially came from an IT background.
I did.
And so what drove you to make the change? And how did you even more so like what drove you to make the change? What was the pivot like? Because IT and tech is something that requires a lot of objective knowledge, whereas photography is something that requires a lot of subjective knowledge.
Well, I mean, in terms of the mechanics of the actual conversion, the switch from one to the other, that was pretty straightforward. I worked for a company that was that decided to move my whole department out of state, and it was somewhere. It wasn't a job that I loved, and it was somewhere I definitely didn't want to go. And so it just made it easy. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going. So they gave me a not as good as it should have been severance, but like a decent enough severance for me to get a couple months under me, and I took the time from the moment they announced that they were moving to my end date. I took the time to really put in the work and start. I had already been writing for blogs and covering food for a good couple of years at that point. And those were literally, I was getting $35-40 for a post about lunch, in Midtown and wherever. And it was just because, it was enough to pay for a couple lunches, which is what the point was. Right. Yeah. But like it put me on the beat. It put me on the food beat. I was shooting a nightlife column for this other website, and it also gave me a beat. It gave me a place it gave me assignments, or it gave me the idea to create assignments for myself. And so, I would look through listings of what's open, what's new, what's happening, and there would be all these different things, and I would just connect there and talk to people and become sort of known enough so I maybe got invited to things and that sort of thing. I mean, it's funny, people are into that, are having the whole conversation about influencers or content creators or whatever you want to call them. And I mean, people are having that same conversation about bloggers a decade and a half ago. And really it's just, it's just about a transition in the larger scale of how things work. I mean, if you're going to do it well, which is really what's important, then it doesn't really matter which medium you're using, right? In my case, I'm not a video person. I'm very much like, I picked my lane. I do stills. I focus on food and portraits and storytelling. But like, at that time, I needed that beat in order to point me in the direction of how to develop those skills. And so when it happened, I mean, I still did some freelance IT work for another like year and a half or so. But yeah, it got me to a point where I was getting enough clients where like I was able to start building a reputation for somebody who people should hire, and a visibility so that people knew who I was enough that, I was able to engage with them fairly early on. I guess like 11 years ago or so, I ended up starting the shoot for the Beard Foundation, and at the time it was a volunteer position, and it was just like, whoever they could get to photograph in the kitchen, and it was a great opportunity for me. I was able to connect and engage with chefs from around the world, from around the country, and so that when I saw them next time, they remembered me, or and that's how it really came up for me. It was to be able to start making those connections. And to go to your actual question, like, I don't feel like that's not super different from how I worked in IT, because for me, and this was sometimes a conflict with some of my higher ups, but for me, engaging with the people who I was working with, the clients, the subjects, the whoever, was always the most important part. I had a boss who would always want me at my desk or in meetings with him where you're talking about what people need. And I was much more interested in going to their desk, going to meet with my clients, going to meet with the different departments and asking them what they need and seeing what they're dealing with, and connecting with them individually, not over email or over some, help desk ticket or something like that. And so, I was much more one to sort of walk the floor, and make that a part of like how I understood what we should be doing and what actually would help people do the jobs they need to do. And so, that's not different from the way I am in the kitchen, where I might chat with somebody about, like, while they're working, I might chat with them about, their motivation, about what they're doing, about their experiences, about what, their careers, their paths, whatever. And that helps me get an idea of who they are, as a subject, as a person, and like that informs like how I'm building the work with them.
Got it. Yeah, you said a few interesting things.
So Sorry.
First, I didn't. No, that's cool. I didn't realize that you explicitly don't do video. You only do stills, which I'm here for. I think I may, at some point, Clay, I might go kicking and screaming into some video component of this podcast, but I would be so okay to leave it as audio because like you mentioned, I just really want to focus on the person and the storytelling. But like you said, that goes across industries and work.
Right.
With this being now such a selfie culture where people are accustomed to photographing themselves more times than not, what do you think gets captured in having your picture taken that you just cannot get in a selfie?
I'm not anti-selfie. Like, I think it's actually interesting that people are considering like their angles and considering like what they like and like how they want to present themselves. Maybe sometimes people will then get stuck in those ways. So like I like to be sort of informed by what they think they want out of all that. But everybody's seen somebody's Instagram feed where the entire feed is the same picture of the same person, like in different places, right? They got their one pose down, their one look, their one angle, and they think that means that that's all they need to do. And I think having another person, another perspective, another eye.
Got the door of Dracula creaking in the background.
I know. I'm waiting for Vincent Price. I don't know if you got it, so I can go back.
No, that's okay.
I think we've seen a lot of people who have who just do the same thing, and they think that that's the only way they present. And having another eye, having somebody there, having an engagement, honestly, because I think there's a difference between staring at yourself in the phone and like actually engaging with the person. A lot of times people ask me like, how do you get the energy from people?
Yeah. How do you?
It's about the engagement. It's about the talking. It's about understanding who they are and having them understand that I am not a stranger to their world. Being able to connect on a way that isn't just like, in food and restaurants, you have a lot of, everyone's got to do their press. Everyone's got to do, got to have somebody coming in to photograph them who may or may not know anything about what they're doing. And it ends up feeling like a chore, right? It ends up feeling like, okay, I got to do this thing all over again. I just did this last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever. And, my PR person's on my ass because they're like, oh, we got to get more press. We got to get you out there. And they're like, I just want to cook, or I just need to run my restaurant, or like, whatever it is. I'm going into it as like a bit more of a known quantity, as somebody who at the very least, even if we've never met before, I can start chatting them up about like what the local food scene is like, about, mutual friends or other things like that. Like I did a photography workshop in small town Missouri.
Wait, is that the town's name for real?
No.
Oh.
I'm not remembering the name, but it's like it was a very, very small town.
Okay.
In Missouri, and outside of Kansas City. And we had to make our own sort of assignments. And of course, I went with the food angle. Like I found the diner, and a lot of the people there were more other people in the program were photojournalists, and so they were looking for like people with hard luck stories, and like, the guy sleeping under the bridge, and like all this other stuff going on. And I saw them all going to the diner to sort of chat up the locals and see where, what they could talk about, or what stories they could find. And I looked behind the counter and I saw, a 30-something-year-old woman on the griddle. And I was like, this is like an old diner. It says it's from like since 1927. You expect some grizzled old dude to be back there, like where, it's unusual. And it turned out that just a year or so before, she and her husband had bought the place. They'd been working in the industry in Colorado before, and but like her dad had lived in that town. The town's called Excelsior Springs. Just came to me. And so they had been, running this place for a little under a year. And, I was able to talk to them as like, not just another one of these photographers, but, I was able to engage on a level that's like, I know restaurants, right? I'm curious about how you're doing things. I'm curious about, this was, I think 22. And so, there were questions about like, about the cost of everything, about, the way that like, reopening was happening and like, all of those things. And like, I could speak from experience from all the other people I know who are in the industry, and actually have like a more than surface conversation. Right. And so, chatting them up a little bit and finding out where else they'd worked or who they'd worked with, and getting to a point where there was a more sort of natural feeling of like, okay, well, Clay's here and he's going to photograph us. And that's, and, he's going to come and meet us at 4 a.m. when we are opening up, and the time that's like their quiet time, like, before everything starts, I'm going to be there with them, and, they can talk to me, they can engage with me, or they can just like sit and chill. They don't have to pose. Like one of my favorite images from the whole set was the couple, Dan and Morgan. When they sit down together for a cup of coffee out in front of the place, like just before everything starts up. After they've set everything up and everything's in motion, they have like 5 minutes, and I just went across the street, like out of their way, and got one shot of them with the diner behind them, and like it's this moment of peace before everything starts. And like, that's what it's about for me, is like not making it so that everyone feels like they need to do something for me or they need to stop what they're doing so that they can be there for me. It's letting them just be themselves, as much as that's possible.
Yeah. Be yourself in front of the camera, but still capturing things a selfie could not. Yeah. A selfie could not have gotten that.
Right, because no one's themselves in a selfie. That's not what a selfie is about. A selfie is not about being yourself, right? It's about posing in a way that like everybody else is doing, or it's like what you think you're supposed to be doing. I mean, I think we're past the duck face stage, but like,
I think we are past the duck face stage.
But like that for a while, that was everything. And it's like, and it's not because they think that's how they should look. It's that this is what they see everybody else doing. And so they think that's what you're supposed to do. And so, yeah, you're not being yourself in a selfie. You're being whatever you think a selfie is supposed to be.
Whatever you're trying to communicate in the moment.
Exactly.
Got it. Selfies, we love them, but, limited perspective. Right. In addition to photography, you're also one of the co-founders of Black Food Folks.
Yes.
Which started in 2019, focused on providing resources and fostering community among Black professionals in the food and drink industry. What was the impetus for that?
So, I mean, as many challenges as we have now, as much as, we see like DEI receding and all of that, we're still in a different time than it was 5 years ago. 5-6 years ago, we just didn't have the visibility in food in the community. it was, at that point I had been in the industry. I'd been covering the industry for nearly a decade. And, you know, I was much more New York based than I am now. I mean, I'm still New York based, but like most of my work was being done there. And, and I would go to events, I would shoot on sets, I would shoot in restaurants, and there would always be, like, I might be the only black face in the room, or there might be two or three or four, and I knew everybody by name, right? And it was often the same folks, right? And there was a community in there because we were always like the only ones there, but also it was lonely. And, there was always this thing where, because there were seemingly so few of us, we were always willing to connect with each other and talk and give advice or make introductions or whatever. And somebody like me who crosses a lot of ground, I might be in a kitchen one day, I might be working with a writer another day, I might be hired by an event producer, I might be, whatever. I'm meeting folks in a lot of different sort of strata of the food world. And my co-founder, Colleen Vincent, was working at the Beard Foundation, also sort of connecting with a lot of people in different parts of the industry. And there was always this sort of thing where, like, we have a friend, Nicole Taylor, who we always call the Great Connector. She was this person who,
the plug.
Yeah, we we came up together, and there was always oh, you don't know blah blah blah, like that's how she connected me with Colleen. Colleen and I had probably been in the same room together before, but I feel like we officially met at a book event hosted by Colleen at the Beard House for her first book, Up South. And there's always this thing where it's like, you're dealing with this thing, you're dealing with, an editor who, no matter how you try to tell this very specific story about your Black experience, wants to plug it into the only Black experience they understand, right? So, Portia Wilson once told me about how she was trying to talk about the story of the food in Maryland, where she's from, and how it's unique. And they just kept trying to pull it back into soul food. And it's like, oh, okay, well, this isn't, if it's going to be a soul food story, then we need to talk about these things, right? And it's like, but it's not a soul food story, it's a Black food story, right? And those aren't the same things. Right. But, whether because the editor does or doesn't understand that, or because the editor thinks their audience won't understand that, you end up then having to spend, 3/4 of the story explaining the difference instead of just saying, this is what the story is, right? And, I talk to writers, I talk to chefs, I talk to other folks throughout the industry, and they were all running into these same things. This, people talk about gatekeepers now, but like at the end of the day, really, it's like having to fit the stories you're trying to tell into the box of people who don't care enough to learn any more than they already know.
Okay.
And so, it would be, a writer having an issue with something like that, and maybe I would connect them with Nicole, who might know an editor who might be able to help them, or might know, who might know another venue or publication or something that might be willing to take a story like that. In restaurants, if it's a chef who, it may just be commiseration, but if it's a chef who, is getting reviews that are talking about like, well, this doesn't make sense because this is not like others, this is not the soul food I expect. And it's like, well, this isn't that sort of restaurant, right? Then, maybe connect them to a writer who can better tell their story, right? Who maybe can then pitch something to some other publication that's like, this is what this is about. And so I get very long-winded when I talk about
that's okay. We're here for the details.
Right. But I mean, basically what ended up happening is that there was always this thing where it's like, oh, these people should meet these other people. And, at one point we said, well, why don't we just get some folks together and have a gathering and let people meet each other? And, my vision had been that this was going to be 20 to 30 people in the back room of some bar or restaurant somewhere. Colleen thinks bigger sometimes with these things. And we ended up having a function. And we had over 100 people show up at her dad's office that also doubles as an event space because we're West Indian and that's what happens. Yeah. And yeah, we had folks coming from as far away as Connecticut and Maryland, and one person who had a stopover on their way home from Australia.
People was pulling up.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone is excited about this idea that we're going to get folks together. And we're going to have people in the same room and we're going to talk about, about how we can support each other, and how we can share each other's stories. And that's really what it has always been about. So, it was about that, making connections and letting people be there in front of each other and explain and being able to not have to translate what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we've been doing that for a while now. I mean, it's been on and off. We're on a semi hiatus. We have for the last 3 years done an event at Virtue during the James Beard weekend. And I hope to do some more in New York and elsewhere in the coming months or year. But then in 2020, our plan had been to do a bunch more events, and then we got one done.
They're that way.
Yeah. But it ended up actually working out for us because we got on the Instagram Live bandwagon pretty early on, and over a year and a half, we did about 200 hours of live conversations.
Yeah.
Where I basically reached out to folks who had nothing else to do. Everyone was furloughed or
captive
laid off
audience.
Or whatever.
Yeah. And,
I went to a handful of chefs and other folks and said, hey, so if you could talk to anybody in the community, any other Black professionals working in and around food, who would it be? And I had folks give me lists, and I reached out, and and we had bookings, and suddenly we were having sometimes 3-4 a day talks about history, about about culture, about food, about cooking, about booze, happy hour. We had Jackie Summers hosting a happy hour talk with beverage people. I always love that because I connected him and Garrett Oliver from the Brooklyn Brewery, and it turns out that they grew up not terribly far from each other.
Okay.
In Hollis, Queens. which is where I lived for the first couple of years of my life before moving to Brooklyn. And it was always one of those small world things. And yeah, and so we were able to do that. And in that time when everyone suddenly remembered that Black people exist and money was flowing,
Money was coming from out of the woodwork.
right? We were able to get some grants
Nice.
and give away money to various Black food organizations, businesses, nonprofits, whatever. In the end, we gave something like $180,000.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. Starting with the first year we gave 10 $5,000 grants, to help a lot of people launch. And then over time we started giving bigger ones out. The last one was, I want to say $50,000 to Maya Camille Broussard of Justice of the Pies in Chicago.
Okay. I'm not familiar with them. Justice of the Pies.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
you didn't see her in Chicago?
I saw a lot of people in Chicago. Clay, I don't know who I saw in Chicago because I saw so many people.
Right. Well, she had she hosted the sort of pop up with Serene, and Adrian Cheatham, and I feel like there was and Fariel, at her space. It's way in south side Chicago.
Okay.
Like further south than Virtue. But yeah, and so she was in the middle of raising funds to be able to buy the space and build it out and all that, and it was the right time, and we were able to give that out with money from Talenti.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, Talenti.
Yeah.
I like them too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but yeah, so we managed to get some things done. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Chicago and the event at Virtue, which I got to experience that this summer at James Beard. And it was so funny. I'll just tell you like the little story. It was so funny because we were at the reception after the media awards. And so just talking to people in general, and people kept saying, hey, you're going to the party tomorrow night. And I was like, I don't know what party they're talking about. Right. And they were like, who's having a party? And they was like, Clay. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, I didn't hear anything, but I'm very new in this space, so I'm like, I'm not connected, right? Much so, but I ran into you a little later in the evening and I was like, so Clay, I heard there's going to be a party. And you were like, yeah, are you coming? And I was like, oh, well, can I come? And you said, and I won't forget it because let me take a step back before I say what you said. I bought a ticket to come to James Beard, right? I wasn't there sponsored. My job is not connected to this. So they did not send me, just off the strength of what I'm doing with the podcast and with content. I felt like I wanted to be there. And I came into that weekend not really knowing what to expect. And then being so surprised at the depth of infrastructure there was, particularly on the media side. Right. I just really did not have visibility to it. But I was very much starstruck a lot of the weekend. I'm like, there's Tony Tipton Martin, there's Rick Bayless, there's Cheryl Day. I was in that mode. So when you said, are you coming to the party? I was like, oh, can I? And you said, are you Black? And I said, yes. And you said, do you work in food? And I said, yeah. And you're like, well, then you come to the party.
There you go.
And I was so happy to be there. So that sense of community y'all are trying to cultivate, that came across.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of glossed over it, but there's a feeling of, we're in the regular day-to-day job. We're in so many spaces where even now there aren't as many of us, and it's much better now than it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, for sure. It is a world apart, and there is work to be done for sure. Mm-hmm. But that first gathering, there was just this joy I felt that I didn't even know was possible because I'd never felt that before. There was this myth, because I photographed like so many events, I've been in so many of those rooms where, there are just a couple of us. And it was always the story that there just aren't that many Black people working in food. There aren't that many Black chefs. There aren't that many Black food writers. There aren't that many Black photographers. There aren't that many whatever, right? And it's bullshit. And because so many of those events are so centered on anyone but us, like we accepted for a long time that like, okay, well, I just got to work my way through this environment and build what I can build. And there was a very old way of thinking that is like, if I'm going to succeed, it has to be me. And like, I cannot like, if someone else comes in, they replace me.
Okay.
And that was already moving away, and people were definitely becoming more collaborative and more mutually supportive. But it was still a moment where like you didn't have that space where it's like, it's just Black folks here. And we have our connections, but we also have our differences, and we don't have to be a monolith, and we can try a lot of different things, and we can represent a lot of different things in our own ways. I mean, the work that I do is, I feel like it is a part of it, an underlying thing for me is this variety of Blackness. I photographed Kwame's book, and Kwame's got heritage in Trinidad, Jamaica, Louisiana, and Nigeria.
Wow.
And he's coming from the Bronx. And it's like,
All great people come from the Bronx, myself included.
I'm sorry, I'm from Brooklyn, so I do not support that.
About to get borough wars going in here.
but like, even the Bronx is specific, right? Like, he's not from Harlem, he's not from Brooklyn, like he's from the Bronx, right? And he's not representing all of New York, he's representing his experience. And I mean, that's what Tatiana is, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's got short rib pastrami suya, right? It's like, it's pastrami because New York. It's suya because Nigeria, right? Like, and it comes with, if I remember correctly, it comes with cocoa bread, right?
You remember correctly.
And like, that comes with the beef patty, right? And so you've got all this stuff on a plate, right? You couldn't have done that 10 years ago.
Yep. And damn sure not in Lincoln Center.
Well, obviously.
Right.
But it's one of these things where like we're able to be, when there's more of us, we're not forced to represent everything in one space, right? So like in the work I've been doing, I get to see the scope, right? Because, I photographed Kwame's book, and then a couple of months later, I was on Edisto Island photographing Gullah Geechee home cooking with Miss Emily Meggett, who at the time, she's since passed, but at the time was 89 years old, and and had a very distinct and different background and history and perspective. A month or so later, I was with Todd Richards photographing his book, which is very much about the diaspora, but also like about his own story. He's from Chicago. He has made his career in Atlanta. And so, it's this, I mean, I always sort of come back to the Italians, like in Italian food. And I'm old enough to remember when like Italian food meant pizza and like red sauce on pasta with like, you know, the bottle of Chianti with like the wicker thing around it and like the checkerboard, like
Yes, the tablecloth.
tablecloth, right? Like, and, and like that's a spicy meatball, right? It's racist as shit, right? But like this was like that's the entirety of what like Italian food was seen as. And, over 30 years from any number of people, including Batali, including Mark Vetri, including a whole lot of people who fought to show that there's depth. And, we've gotten to a point where it's like, you say you're opening an Italian restaurant, you're like, okay, is it Roman? Is it Sicilian? Is it
Northern?
Tuscan? Is it
Yeah.
Northern, Southern? Like whatever, right? Like, and that took 30 years to happen easily. And, and like we're making our way, and it might take a while, but like the fact that we've gotten at least where we are. Another book I did was a Ethiopian Jewish book. Like I photographed. I'm here photographing Crystal Wapapa's book, and it's largely about her native heritage, but like her father is Black, and that is a part of her history as well.
Yeah.
I photographed a book earlier this year for Charlize Rookwood, who is from London, and her father's Jamaican. Her father was Jamaican. Her mother is from Mauritius.
Okay.
And so you've got Indian, East African, Jamaican, and London, and she's in Brooklyn now, so Brooklyn too, right? And so you have this like, we had this crew where my assistant, my food stylist, and I all have Jamaican background. And so like there were points where we were like, yeah, this is, like we're trying to put together the scene for ackee and saltfish and and people are trying to make it like sort of sexy. And I'm like, this is breakfast. Like, what are you talking about? This is just a breakfast scene.
Gussy it up too much.
I mean, you can make it fancy, but like, this is something you're eating in the morning, right? Yeah. Like, and we all have different sort of connections to the food, but like being in a place where like we have these touch points and we have these experiences with the food and with the culture and with the background, like, it means that we're able to share perspectives on it. And yeah, I mean, I don't even remember how we got here, but like my point is that it's different now because like we're at a spot, where like we're able to be visible in multitudes, and we're able to have our perspectives respected more as individual. And that wasn't the way that things were 5-6 years ago when we first started Black Food Folks. Black Food Folks, part of the reason for Black Food Folks was to be able to express our individuality together. And yeah, I mean, it's still this joyous moment where when we're able to get together and we're able to share our stories with each other and we're able to connect and be in the room with each other. I don't know. It's just it's still wonderful and novel and exciting.
It is. It is all those things. Well, I've absolutely experienced the environment you speak of. I'm looking forward to experiencing so much more of it. Thank you again for talking with me today. Tell
My pleasure.
people where they can find out more about you and your work.
I guess social media still rules. I'm Ultra Clay on Instagram and Threads. I never deleted my account, but I'm not on Twitter anymore. And I don't really touch Facebook that often, but I think it
Okay.
mirrors what I post on Instagram. So, I mean, if you want to, you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to include that with the show notes. And if you want to keep up with me in between episodes, you can find me on Instagram at Hey K in the Bay. That has been this week's episode of the As Told by podcast. I'll see y'all on the next one.